Hi everyone. I think we're going to make a start. I don't think we're expecting loads and loads of people, so people might come in as we go. But I'll make a beginning now. My name's Pete Barbrook-Johnson. I'm the Deputy Director of Agile. I'm joined by Rachel Hayman, who's the Program Manager. What we're planning to do today is give an introduction to this new call for sprints that you've hopefully already seen. I will talk for hopefully no more than 10 minutes, just to give you a sense of the sort of parameters of the call and a little bit of background on Agile, and then we'll open up for questions. I mean, we can stay for the full hour. There's lots of questions, or we can finish early, whatever people want. Please feel free to interrupt or raise your hand. Hopefully, we'll spot that if you've got questions as we go. I think there's not too many of us, so we can just we can keep it fairly informal. So please feel free to interrupt. Yeah, so just to give you a kind of sense of what we're doing, Agile is a NERC funded program. They gave Oxford £10 million to spend over 5 years. We started in 2022, we go until 2027. And one of the things we do is fund research sprints, as we call them. And so what I'm going to try and do today is really focus on explaining this new call for sprints. The challenge that Agile is trying to address, I think, is hopefully one that we're all probably familiar with, is that we need to have a stronger connection between the research that we produce, the science we produce, and the policy making process. And so particularly in areas around environmental research and environmental science, particularly around climate and biodiversity and nature, we know that we need really rapid evidence. These are very pressing issues, but we need evidence that is both kind of correct and scientifically rigorous and innovative, but also meets policy challenges and is practical and pragmatic. And finding that sweet spot and making those connections between research and policy, I think, is something which has been around for a long time as a challenge, but is not being cracked. And this is another push in that direction. So we're really trying to reimagine how we produce and supply and co-create research with policymakers. The things we're doing to try and achieve that are really the three goals you see on the left-hand side of the slide here. I think is the main. I'm not going to read through all this slide, but the three goals are the main thing. So we have a whole cohort or multiple cohorts of research sprints. These are actual individual projects in their own right, some of them quite large, where we're trying to deliver the research in a co-created, policy-led way. But we're also, beyond just doing the research, we're also trying to support the development of a critical mass, a community of researchers who have the skills and confidence to do this type of research, to work closely with policymakers, businesses, NGOs. And so there's a whole kind of community building aspect to Agile's work. And lastly, I think we also recognize that there's a structure and system within which research is operating, which has not historically maybe favored this type of work so well. And so we're really trying to shift the culture, both within Oxford, but also with our funder in NERC and in other institutions in that kind of research landscape, shift the culture so that this type of rapid policy-focused research is more valued and more incentivized and more better rewarded. So those are the kind of three key legs to what we're doing. We're also constantly learning. One of our key values is experimentation and learning from our experimentation. So as we're going through Agile, we've got 5 years. We've already had 2 years of learning. We are changing what the Agile model is. And a key site for this is what we mean by a sprint. And so we had a cohort of 5, 6 original sprints. We call them pioneer sprints sometimes. Most of those have come to an end, not all of them, but most of them have come to an end now. So we've learned a lot from those. We had another call for sprints come out in the middle of last year, and so we had a couple more sprints funded there. And this is our this call that we released a couple of weeks ago is our third big push on sprints. And so each time we've gone through an iteration of learning, both on the really practical level of how do we deliver this, how do we manage this, how do we work as a team, and learning on co-creation, how do we produce research that is useful for policymakers and policymakers have ownership of. And so we're constantly learning, and the Agile model is developing. And I'm very keen that with this round of sprints, we learn again. And so there's lots of learning I'm hoping to capture from the sprints that we fund through this call. And, we may change the model again. We may shift and tweak. It's not that this is now the settled way of doing sprints. What I keep saying or talking about sprints, we're going to try and focus in now on what we mean by that. Here's the kind of high level description of what a sprint is. A sprint should be a research project that has a very clear policy pull and policy ownership for whoever those stakeholders might be. We often think about government, but it can be businesses or NGOs as well. We need them both to have a policy pull and also this be something that's very timely for them, something that really needs to happen now rather than something that could happen at any point in the next few years. And on timing, I think people often say, how long is a sprint? And really the kind of short answer is 12 months or less. So it could be much quicker. But if you're thinking of something that's 2 or 3 year project, then maybe that's a more traditional research project. That's not what we would call a sprint. Sprints are also deeply co-created. When I throw, lots of people throw that word around. When I say it, I hope I mean it, and I really think we need co-creation both on the purpose and scope of a project, as well as doing the research with stakeholders and disseminating and sharing it with them. It's not just at the end for dissemination and sharing. We really want to develop purpose and approach of research with users. Projects should be kind of fiercely interdisciplinary. I think that's clear. Policy makers, businesses, NGOs, they think in interdisciplinary ways. They work in that way. So often that forces us to be interdisciplinary, even if we are used to working in silos. And then last but not least, our sprints do have a really strong commitment to positive equality impact, and really trying to think both in terms of who's doing the research and are we being thoughtful about making sure we're being inclusive in how we build research teams, but also the topic of the research. Are we thinking about voices that might be not normally heard? Are we thinking about the potential impacts of the research we're doing on different types of communities? So we will also assess and think about sprints through their EDI impact, as it were. And just to say a bit more on diversity and inclusion, because I think we've always had a strong ambition on diversity and inclusion, but I think we're really starting to push now. We've got an EDI officer in place recently. Both as the Agile program as a whole, we're doing a lot of work thinking about the program as a whole, what we're doing. We have an EDI plan, which I hope will be published on Friday, if not early next week, which has a very detailed set of actions and criteria to assess ourselves on. But the program as a whole is one part of it. We also want sprints to think about how they're doing on diversity and inclusion. So when you're proposing sprints, we will ask you to talk about team recruitment, talk about the research design, talk about the substantive topic and how it affects EDI issues. And so you will be asked to reflect on those if you submit an expression of interest, and we will assess proposals on that too. Just to give you a very quick flavour of some of the sprints that have already been happening in not spend topics. So one of the smaller sprints was in Brazil, doing some modeling on how net zero can be Brazilian government, working closely with the Brazilian government. The second sprint in this list here is the biodiversity sprint, which is a much larger one, really focusing on biodiversity net gain, how we bring that about, how to implement that in a kind of just and actionable way. We also have a sprint much more focused at a local level in Leicestershire, thinking about how we use food waste, organic waste, how that can be used. There's been a lot of work done in the Midlands on that in that third sprint you can see there. We have a sprint, another large kind of sprawling beast of a sprint, the nature-based solutions one, thinking about how we scale up nature-based solutions, doing lots of different aspects of that question. We have a sprint on shipping, thinking about how the shipping industry can transition to green ammonia as a fuel. There's a lot of modelling work going on in that sprint. And then the third one you can see here is up in the North Sea, looking at how we can store CO2 more safely, and building a kind of decision-making framework for assessing the environmental impact of that kind of technology, which of course a lot of people are quite hopeful about, even though there's often skepticism. So those were the 6 sprints that we initially started with, and then these 2 here are the more recent ones. So these are very much live now and will be running for over the coming months. One is focused mainly in Northern Ireland, but not entirely, looking at how we assess uncertainties in greenhouse gas emissions from different types of land use. So really, I think this is mainly focused on peatland, but there's a lot of open questions about how much emissions come from different types of land use, and how we assess that. So they're trying to resolve some of those issues. Very strong partnerships in Northern Ireland, as I say. And then again, a completely different one, the second one here, which is looking at Earth systems modeling, trying to resolve a kind of long-standing technical issue with spinning up Earth systems models that causes a lot of time and reduces the ability of us to use those models to run lots of different scenarios. So our researchers there are working with the Met Office on that issue. So hopefully you get a sense of the real diversity of topics. When we say environmental research is our focus, that is broadly conceived, absolutely, and includes both the natural sciences, the physical, and the social sciences. Okay, so now I'll say a few words about this specific sprint call that we put out a couple of weeks ago. So the call is all focused around these 10 research. Hopefully, if you've been sent the documents, if you've registered to see the documents, you've seen that list of 10. I'll talk about them briefly, but you really absolutely must read that document that describes those 10 topics to get a sense of what we're asking you to respond to, because the call is basically saying, please take one of those topics and then tell us how you would design a sprint around that, how you would respond to that topic that's been proposed. You can be critical of that topic if you want, but you need to engage with it. The budget scope is quite large. I think we're very fortunate to have good funding available. So the budgets will be in the range of £150,000 to £400,000 for each individual sprint. You can apply as a team. If you've already got a team in place, that's fine, that's great. Apply as a team. Or if you're an individual researcher that maybe feels like, oh, I'm not connected into the existing teams, or I'm someone who's working on this on my own at the moment, you can apply as an individual. That's one of the things we're doing to try and help reach people that might otherwise be excluded. In terms of length, as I've said, 12 months is the kind of maximum. In terms of team, it's really dependent. You might have a very small concentrated team, you might have a slightly larger team, depending on what you're proposing. There's a basic two-stage process where we've put out this call for expressions of interest. So what we're asking for right now is quite short, a few pages describing what you'd like to do. Those will then be assessed, and then we move to when the proposals that are selected then move forward to full co-creation with our policy partners, a full proposal with costing. So the heavy lifting of proposal comes there when there's much more certainty that the funding is going to flow. In this round, we're planning to fund ideally 4 to 5 sprints, but we may fund less if we feel like the topics don't emerge, if the response is low, but that's the kind of the scale we're hoping to go with. Hopefully projects will start as soon as possible. It's always a bit of a mad rush to get them set up, but given the timelines we're looking at, I think the ones that are making really quick progress, where maybe there's real urgency, might start early summer, maybe June. And then maybe those that is slightly less urgent, or we aren't able to progress as quickly, maybe we'll start after the summer lull. Maybe they'll start in September. That's the kind of timeline I think we're looking at. And really important to mention, there will be another call in the autumn, I think probably September, October sort of time, I would hope, where we'll have maybe new topics, or we might reformulate how we do it and have it more open again. But there will be another call coming later in the year, and then and unless we suddenly spend all of our money really rapidly, maybe another call in the next year. Here are those topics I mentioned, these 10 topics. So you can see we've got 5 from DEFRA, Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. We've got 3 from DESNZ, which is Energy, Security and Net Zero, and then 1 from the Office for Environmental Protection and 1 from Natural Resource Wales. So DEFRA have proposed a couple around the global biodiversity framework. They've got one around using new data science tools. That one's quite open, I think. There's quite a lot of space to wiggle room in that one. There's a very urgent one on ash dieback and looking at the role of roadside trees. That one has got a slightly earlier deadline. And there's one on looking at multiple pressures on different species. So you get a sense already. There's a breadth even there within DEFRA. In DESNES, the three there, there's one looking at the IPCC and thinking about how the IPC operates, trying to make it more action focused. I think this one's really interesting. IPCC, some vital one on the resilience of net zero scenarios to future climate risks. I hear people talking about this more and more now as a gap that needs to be filled quite urgently. And there's also one on biomass supply chain standards, really thinking about kind of carbon leakage for some of those kind of carbon removal and storage technologies. The Office for Environmental Protection one, I think, is really interesting. OEP, remember, their remit is to kind of hold government to account on its environment goals. And really what they're looking for is a kind of semi-quantitative tool to help them guide their decisions about where to push at government. You know, if there's 100 different goals and 1,000 different activities, which are the ones that might be behind schedule, which OEP should then be pushing at government. So they want some kind of tool to help them do that. And then Natural Resource Wales are really interested in bringing some of the national level policy down to a kind of more local place-based level, and are interested in developing their thinking and maybe some sort of tool around that. So that's just a very quick flavour of what those topics are like. Please do have a look at the document which outlines those in more detail. Each one has got kind of between 1 and 3 pages explaining them. Just a couple of words on what happens if you're successful. So a successful expression of interest moves through to this what we call co-creation stage, where the researchers, you as the team who apply, the policy partners who propose the topic, and any other stakeholders we think need to be involved, together develop that full proposal. And that full proposal maybe is not super long. It's maybe only still 3 to 5 pages, say, plus some costings. But it's a more detailed, clear plan of what's coming. And so that co-creation allows us to ensure the research question is clear, because maybe the topics we have so far are not super clear. It helps us build the team. It helps us develop the work plan and the budget. We also do an equality impact assessment. And we also really pin down quite carefully how the stakeholders are going to be involved and make sure everyone's got the same expectations. We will be doing some kind of workshops, training, very kind of informal kind of working together sessions with sprint people who've been successful with their expressions of interest on these types of topics. And so co-creation is becoming a kind of key. I mean, it's one of those words that people throw around, I think. But I think we're really keen to pin down exactly how to do this well and share that framing. So it's a really core part of what we do as a program, not just within individual sprints. There's the timeline. We're on the second circle on this kind of roller coaster timeline we're on. So we released the call in mid-Feb. Today's 28th of Feb for the briefing. That ash dieback topic, as I said, has this deadline this week. But all of the rest of the topics, the deadline is midday on the 15th of March. We'll then have a very rapid assessment process by academic standards. We will let applicants know the outcome of that at the end of March, and then the projects or the expressions of interest that have been taken forward will then move forward to co-creation in the kind of spring, early summer. And then, as I already said, projects starting ideally kind of June to September. So it is, by academic standards, by University of Oxford standards, very rapid, and that's part of our remit and part of what we're experimenting and pushing at. My last slide, and then I'll shut up and we'll open up for questions. Just some of the key kind of eligibility and practical details that we often get asked about. So I've already mentioned the 2 pathways. You can apply as an individual or as a team. Lead researchers that PI, whoever they may be, should be putting down at least 20% of their time to the sprint. We need them to be properly engaged. That PI can be, there's quite a broad pool, I think, of people who can be that PI. That can be a very senior academic, or it can be someone on a fixed term contract, a grade 7 researcher, research associate. We're quite keen that we get a spread of different PIs. In terms of the parameters of what can be funded, we can include external collaborators and partners. They can be funded. We just need an Oxford researcher to be the lead. Budgets, as I say, can be between 150k and 400k. UKRI terms and conditions apply, but we're always quite happy and interested in where those are problematic and where we can push at them. Sprint should be 12 months maximum. I don't think we need kind of formal, official departmental approval at this expression of interest stage, but I think it is good to speak to your department, make them aware that you might be doing this. And if you are maybe on a fixed term contract and you're proposing something that goes beyond that, to start those conversations with your line manager and department now to make sure they're happy with that, because we will need that kind of level of agreement from departments and line managers later on. And yeah, there will be a panel in late March where the expressions of interest will be assessed and scored by hopefully a quite mixed panel, and then decisions will be made then. So I think that's all I wanted to say. So I will stop there, and Rachel will chip in when I don't have the answer, which will be quite a lot. So yeah, please raise your hands, or we've got lots of questions in the chat already. Maybe let me have a look. So Lucilla asked, do the sprints need to be developed with one of these policy partners, or can they be developed with other policy partners? I think policy partners who propose these topics and the individual teams and individual civil servants who propose them, absolutely, they're a key partner, but there's no reason why you can't bring in other stakeholders. And so yeah, so I think we do need to work with the ones who proposed it, but we can bring in others as well. Another question, Lucilla, what are the conditions for financially supporting partners outside the university and the UK? I'm thinking about visas, for instance. So I think in the immediate instance, I think you should check the UKRI terms about who is eligible and not. But in basic, in my experience, funding academics at other institutes outside the UK is totally fine. Visas, I guess, will, of course, if someone requires a visa and that's a very slow process, that will cause challenges, but we'll do everything we can within reason, I think. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'll maybe just add on that. Yeah, I mean, if you talk to your pre-award grants officer in your department, they'll also be able to advise you on, what's possible and not possible with regard to UKRI terms and conditions. If you do have an external collaborator partner, academic or non-academic, as part of the Sprint team, we will need to have a formal collaboration agreement in place or some form of contract in place at the start of the award. We can hire in new researchers to the university, but I think you need to be very aware that that does take time, and that has been a challenge with some of the sprints in terms of bringing people in. So the value of the co-creation phase is that we can work all of these things through before the proposal is even submitted for a final decision, and we would get the HR people within the departments involved at an early stage to try and expedite any recruitment as fast as possible, but also to expedite putting collaboration agreements into place.
We have another question on the ASH dieback. So the question from Ken is, what's the timeline for the ASH dieback project? There was mention of initial findings by June. Yes, this one is slightly different, the timeline. So we basically DEFRA are facing they have some really big questions they need to resolve, and I think really tricky, interesting questions. There are internal processes in DEFRA which mean it would be useful for them to have some preliminary findings or pointers towards where findings may be going in June, and so that's a date that they put to us saying we'd love something in June. But of course, I think in practice we wouldn't expect a sprint to be delivering kind of final findings by that stage. So I think it's a question of we have this deadline of the 1st of March for really short expressions of interest on that topic. We will then, and this is literally now next week, we would then see how many expressions of interest we've got back, make a decision on those. We may get none, and we have to think carefully about what we do in that process. Does that mean that we then don't do anything there, or are there people we're aware of working on this topic? And then we immediately dive into a co-creation phase with that particular policy team in DEFRA. And maybe that project starts, and the first thing it starts with is just something done very rapidly in a matter of weeks, and then there's a longer term, more traditional sprint project that then lasts for the rest of the year. But it's all very flexible, and so I think if that's a topic you want to work on, tell us about that by the end of this week. Fill in the form for that one, and then we'll really be working that out together from next week. This is where the agility and the flexibility is really tangible, I think. Yeah, we've got a question from Lely. Would be this call every year the same type? No, I don't think so. The calls come out when they're ready and when the timing's right. This one came out in February just because that's when all of the policy questions, we had a good list of policy questions ready to go to be worked on, in the second half of this year and maybe into 2025. So that will vary. So I think if you want to keep up to the best way to keep up to date on when calls are coming out is to read the website, sign up to the newsletter, and that's when you'll hear about things first.
It might be just worth adding that this call is obviously underneath a grant that lasts through till January 2027. So it's a finite pot and a finite program at the moment, which means we, in all likelihood, we've got this call now. We'll have one again in the autumn. Probably do, and certain, I'm fairly sure we'll do another one next year, but at some point we won't be able to fund any more sprints because we'll be running out of time to complete them before the programme finishes, and we'll be running out of resources in our flexible pot. So this is not, at the moment under this current phase of Agile, it's limited over the next couple of years.
Next question. I'd like to link DESNES to the final topic. This is the one from Natural Resource Wales, place-based approaches for organising local resources. Yes, the question is, if I want to connect in DESNES, does that sound viable or interesting? I think that absolutely does. Absolutely. I think thinking creatively about the topic is what we want people to do. You do need to engage with it. You can't completely, you can't ignore that. Being critical, maybe thinking about how the scope might be. We want researchers to respond to in the call. It's not, we don't just say, oh, this is a scope for a piece of consultancy and we just deliver it as we've been requested. This is something we react to, and then we co-produce the full project. So I think getting that balance right is part of that co-creation. Obviously, if you're very critical, then that's maybe slightly risky in the decision process. We will take on the views of the policy partners. So if you basically say this topic has been expressed terribly, they might not like that, and then that might be reflected in their comments. But I think it's absolutely, and we would love to see a critical engagement with those topics. Don't just take them as read. Some of them are not perfect for sprints. Some of them maybe feel too big or are slightly biased in particular ways. Next question, is it okay to apply for more than one sprint? Absolutely. Yeah, I think the answer is yes to that.
But you need to do separate application forms for each topic that you want to apply for so that you can ensure that your application is specifically focused on that topic that you're applying for.
Whilst we wait, I would also just want to emphasize the call documents which you can register to be sent it's basically, there's three things, right? There's a document which outlines these 10 topics, which I think is quite long, but if you're interested in a particular topic, it's hopefully very interesting what people are proposing there. Then there is the guidance document, and that I think is a really fantastic document at describing what you need to think about for a sprint and what the dimensions and parameters of a sprint are. I mean, we're all used as academics to reading these long terms and conditions documents from funders. This guidance document is not that. There's not a load of random detail that you don't need to know that doesn't make a difference. This is useful guidance on how to shape a sprint. So I would really encourage you to read that guidance document, even though it's not a couple of pages, it's more than that, but I would really recommend it. And the last thing that you get is the application forms, which are short. It's not a heavy load to do these. Okay, I think I feel like we saturated questions. I can't see any more questions coming through. So unless there's anything you feel like you want to cover,
everything. I think it's worth saying that if you've got questions after that arise after this that you think of, or want to have a look at the call documents, please feel free to contact us at the email address that's given in the on the website and in the call guidance, and we will get back to you on any further questions that arise. And yes, we will available for people who could not attend today. How's it going to be shared? Okay, are we making it available on the website? And it will be available on the website as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Do let us know, if you have any questions or any feedback, keep in touch. And I think we'll draw things to a close. Thanks for coming.
And we look forward to receiving some brilliant applications.
Yeah. Thanks all. Bye-bye.